everyone, my name is Owain on the Thomas Buzz channel, and today I wanted to talk about the one thing that I really wanted to happen in My Hero Academia that we will never get, unfortunately. So, as you guys know, I'm a big fan of My Hero Academia. I've got loads of merchandise of it. I made loads of shorts on the channel about it. It's an amazing show. And today I wanted to talk about just the one thing, out of everything that I wanted to happen in My Hero, one of them, of course, being more seasons, there was one thing above all the different things that I would have wanted to happen or would have changed, like little things I would have changed, one thing that I really wanted to happen in it. And obviously, spoilers for all of My Hero Academia before we get into it, so 3, 2, 1, dragons. And that one thing was an interaction between Stain and Darby. Specifically their season 6 and 7 versions, so in the time after all of Hero Society has fallen apart in Japan. So, yeah, in this video I'm going to talk about that, and I wanted to just talk about why I thought that would have made sense, and what I think, if this would have happened, what it would have done for the characters and for the storyline in the final war arc, and also just why it would be really cool. Now, Stain and Darby are two of the biggest villains in the whole show, and Stain kind of influences who Darby is, because obviously Stain, in my opinion, he's the best character in the show. He's got an amazing design, creative use of his very weird sort of abstract powers. He's got the most badass lines in the entire show, in my opinion, and he's got a great motivation wanting to get rid of all the false heroes in the world and making a hero society made up of people like Deku, like All Might, made up of all these kind-hearted people. And Stain, despite only having like his major appearance in season 2, where he was like the big thing in that season, so despite only having most of his things be in that season, he affected the entire show, because after his arrest, the League of Villains and the media started saying that he worked with the League of Villains and with Shigaraki, which was like sort of true. He did like sort of work with them for like 2 seconds before he then basically just told them to F off. But that sort of miscommunication and misleading from the League of Villains and from the media is what led all of Stain's followers, that being people like Spinner, Toga, and Darby, to the League of Villains. And yeah, that gets into Darby because he is a follower and a fan of Stain, because obviously Darby, who is revealed to be Toya Todoroki, Endeavor's oldest son, who went down this big like downward spiral after Endeavor sort of neglected him for years on end because he couldn't use both fire and ice powers. And so he went down this whole downward spiral of trying to get his father's affection, leading to him, obviously, his quirk getting out of control and burning his whole body. And so ever since then, Darby has hated Endeavor and these, like, selfish, abusive people like Endeavor who, like, look like heroes on the outside and stuff. So because of the fact that he grew up with one of these false heroes and hates people like Endeavor, it's why he follows Stain, and why throughout the show, and especially when leading up to Stain's return in season 6, Darby will quite often, in fact this is more so with his interaction with Hawks, but he does call himself this a few times throughout the show, I'm pretty sure. He calls himself Stain's follower, or Stain's sort of a successor or whatever, the person who will carry out Stain's dream. So now that we've sort of talked about how Darby is a follower of Stain, I think it's actually time we get into the actual meat of the video, and that's how would they interact? How would it make sense? Blah, 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 blah. Well, having this interaction take place in season 7 makes sense for a lot of reasons. One, before season 7 and before Hero Society fell apart, they couldn't actually interact because Stain was in Tartarus, incarcerated at Tartarus, and Darby wasn't. They simply just couldn't have interacted. And 2, in the final war arc of My Hero Academia, the heroes have a plan to teleport all the villains to different areas across Japan, with a hero team accompanying the villain to take them down, a sort of divide and conquer thing. Darby, as well as the team that was sent to go take him down, which consisted of people like Todoroki and Tenya Ida, they were sent to the All Might statue. And that's a very important thing, because at the end of season 6, when All Might has his talk with Stain, it is at the All Might statue. And from the things that Stain says, calling it sacred ground, it sort of implies that that whole area is Stain's kind of territory. It's sort of where he hangs out. And by the fact that all the heroes and Darby are fighting in that area, like decimating it, in fact, Darby even melts down the All Might statue, I think it would make sense that Stain would get involved. They are trespassing on what he literally calls sacred ground, a monument to who he worships as like the greatest hero, greatest person of all time. So of course, Stain would get involved. And of course, this would mean that Stain and Darby probably wouldn't be fighting on the same side. They would actually be fighting against each other. And I think that's really cool, because I've wanted to see who would win the fight. Because on one hand, obviously, Darby probably has the more flashy, more powerful quirk. But at the same time, Stain isn't exactly going to be an easy fight for Darby. He's very, Stain took on Ida, Midoriya, and Todoroki. Todoroki, who has the exact same powers as Darby, by the way. And he almost managed to kill them. And he actually managed to paralyze them. So if he could take on all 3 of them at the same time, I can't see why he couldn't take on and maybe even defeat Toya, Darby. And it would be really cool, because they wouldn't just be fighting, I'd imagine they wouldn't just be fighting, physically, actually throwing hands. Just throwing hands, I mean. But they'd also be fighting sort of ideologically, or whatever, as well. Because, obviously, they both want the same thing. They want to get rid of false heroes like Endeavour, as is the prime example. But Stain's interaction with All Might in season 6 kind of gives me the implication that, okay, so Stain hasn't so much abandoned his ideologies about false heroes. He'd still definitely believe in that. But he realises that as of right now, as of the moment, it doesn't really matter. The problems right now are so much bigger than just himself and these false heroes. And that, as of right now, it doesn't really matter what these heroes' intentions are. Because as long as they are fighting to restore some kind of order to the world, then it doesn't really matter who you are fighting alongside, just as long as they want to restore order, and they've got, obviously, the strength to do that. Besides, a lot of the false heroes sort of left after Shigaraki decimated everything. So, Stain sort of realising that and deciding to put his beliefs on the back burner so that he can help restore order. I mean, that explains why he would even get any information from Tartarus, or why he would give it to... I know he absolutely adores All Might, but I'm pretty sure he would have known that All Might was working with people like Endeavour, who he absolutely hates, and yet he was still willing to hand over that information to All Might and those heroes. So it kind of shows that he's changed, and for him to fight Darby essentially being a reflection of Stain in a way, because this season 6 and 7, Darby is like the peak bloodthirst that Darby was at. It's when he was at his absolute worst, which is kind of like the polar opposite of Stain, because that's probably when he was at his best, is best in terms of like being the closest thing to a sort of anti-hero kind of way. So for Stain to fight what is essentially the version of him from season 2, when he was at his absolute worst, just wanting to destroy false heroes, and Darby being like that reflection, it would kind of show how much Stain has grown, and to show that at least a part of Stain has changed from that bloodthirsty villain that was hell-bent on killing all these false heroes. So it would serve Stain's character really well for him to fight what is essentially his past, a past sort of reflection of himself. But I feel like it would also be good for Darby, because Darby followed Stain for so long. He devoted himself to Stain's ideology. And so to see his sort of not so much mentor, but to see this person that he followed fight him and tell him, no, this is wrong, we are going about this all wrong, would kind of sort of make Darby realise a bit about maybe this really is wrong, because that's sort of the conclusion that he comes to just before his death in season 7. Because obviously after Todoroki and all the Todorokis kill Darby, in his last moments he kind of realises, was this all it took? If I'd just shown myself to my family, had I just told them how I felt, is that really all it would have taken to finally be seen and to finally get the respect and the love that I had wanted for so long? And so by having Stain sort of be that, not so much that wake-up call, because obviously you've got to have the point where Darby tries to blow everything up, but for Stain to sort of plant that seed in the back of Darby's mind that then grows to lead Darby to that conclusion, would sort of, ease him into that, and it would sort of give him more reasons to come to that conclusion, even though obviously in the end Darby does not forgive any of his family, especially Endeavour. And I mean, obviously he shouldn't, because Endeavour was an abusive, egotistical piece of shit to him. So now, let's say in this hypothetical thing that Stain did actually join in the fight against Darby. Maybe Stain even helped Todoroki defeat Darby, at least for that initial thing where they think they've defeated him, and then it turns out that he hasn't, and he copies like Shoto's ice quirk. But if that happened, then it wouldn't just affect Stain and Darby. We have to remember Ida was also at that battle, the younger brother of the man that Stain paralysed in season 2. And I feel like if those two interacted during this, like after Darby was defeated or something, that would have been a really nice way to kind of give closure on that whole thing, by having them interact and actually showing that Stain's changed in some way, by having him be like, hey, I'm sorry for what I did to your brother. He was a real hero, and now because of me, I've stopped a true hero from doing any more hero work, and I'm sorry. Like, that would have been a really cool interaction to finally give them some closure. Sort of like in Marvel Spider-Man 2, in that, like, final scene where Martin Lee, is talking to Miles, and he apologises for everything he's done to him, and Miles tells him that he's never going to forgive him for what he did, but he just can't keep hating him. I feel like that would have basically been what they would have done here. Stain would have apologised and would have given Ingenium real credit as a true hero, because as is, what did Ingenium even do for Stain to kill him? It kind of feels like that was a sort of false sort of like thing. Stain sort of got the wrong person, misjudged. And so for Stain to actually tell Ida, I'm sorry, he was a real hero, to apologise, and Ida to tell him that he won't forgive him, but he also won't keep on, like, keeping this hate for Stain within him, I think that would have just been a really good interaction to finally close off both of their stories by having them reach that sort of a conclusion about one another. And yeah, I feel like probably even more than the Darby and Stain interaction, this would have been really cool, because it would have really sort of added closure to that whole story and made them come to that sort of understanding about one another. But yeah, that's what I really wanted in My Hero Academia, an interaction between Stain and Darby, and then that bonus thing that I just said there about Ida and Stain bookending that whole story. So, if you guys enjoyed the video, then I do encourage you to like and subscribe. It really helps out a lot. And before I go, I just wanted to play this clip of what I believe is Stain's most badass line. And, well, yeah, with that being said, I will see you guys in the next video. Ta-da!
Use this information I took from Tartarus. And when you've finished, make sure you track me down and put an end to Stain, the vigilante who killed 40 heroes. All for the sake of forging a better society.